Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Tony Kinnett is an admin and STEM educator in the Hoosier State, next door to us, Indiana. Says the largest school district in Indiana. I assume that's Indianapolis. And took to social media to tell us what exactly is going on with respect to teaching critical race theory in the schools. It's not an unfamiliar story, his review of what's happening in the schools that he knows, but it's a story that needs to continue to be told as you run into the denials of the left across the country. Tony Kinnett.
I'm the science coach and admin in the largest public school district in Indiana. I'm in dozens of classrooms a week, so I see exactly what we're teaching our students. When we tell you that schools aren't teaching critical race theory, that it's nowhere in our standards, that's misdirection. We don't have the quotes and theories as state standards per se. We do have critical race theory in how we teach. We tell our teachers to treat students differently based on color. We tell our students that every problem is a result of white men and that everything Western civilization built is racist. Capitalism as a tool of white supremacy. Those are straight out of Kimberly Crenshaw's main points, verbatim in Critical Race Theory, the writings that formed the movement. This is in math, history, science, English, the arts, and it's not slowing down. If students of color have lower reading scores, it's because of inequity. Therefore, we take from the white students and give to the color students. That's Richard Delgado, straight out of CRT and Introduction. All teaching is political, with reality and facts taking the back seat. That's Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who outlined how she saw critical race theory fleshed out in public schools in 1995. When schools tell you that we aren't teaching critical race theory, it means one thing. Go away and look into our affairs no further. It isn't about transparency. It isn't about cultural relevance. It's race essentialism, painted to look like the district cares about students of color. We call it anti-racism, so you feel bad if you disagree with our segregationist pedagogy. It's taking advantage of kids' vulnerability and parents' inactivity to preen over social snake oil schemes designed to create division. Parents, when we tell you critical race theory isn't taught in our schools, we're lying. Keep looking.
And the reason I like hearing from teachers like Tony Kinnett as well is because they cite the scholars that we've gone through here too, but they're giving you the specific text, the specific artifice that's being used to insinuate the Derek Bells and the Richard Delgados into the classroom, even as they deny that anything on the order of trying to indoctrinate kids as to a new racial order in this country is happening. For more on this, because he's got a timely book on the topic, in terms of some historical perspective, Brian Kilmeade joins us. He's the co-anchor of Fox & Friends, of course, nationally syndicated radio host and New York Times bestselling author of the recently released The President and the Freedom Fighter, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and Their Battle to Save America's Soul. Brian, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Danny, thanks for having me on. I love that clip. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. Instead of talking generally, talk specifically. It's not a matter of talking about slavery and Reconstruction, the failure of it, segregation, how bad it was. Nobody's saying avoid that. But to vilify this generation of people because of the color of their skin and to not study it, instead let everybody know who the oppressor is and let everybody know who the oppressed is and tell them in second grade, I think that's a little bit of a problem. And that's the issue. Nobody's trying to plow over that there was slave trade in this country. But our country did not start till 1776. That's called lacing together 13 colonies and taking on the world superpower. People want to get rid of that story, and that's the pushback.
So in your sort of research and pulling together your perspective in this book you wrote about Lincoln and Douglass, what are some of the key takeaways that you took away that you think are relevant today in the conversation that we're having?
So in The President and Freedom Fighter, I just wanted to go back. I don't want to give you the definitive biography on both men, but you've already gotten that. Some great writers, and nobody writes, no topic is more written about than Abraham Lincoln. And Frederick Douglass. The book of the year was David Blythe a couple of years ago.
Right.
So I just wanted to talk about how they moved the country forward. And I didn't want to give you my perception. I want to give you their words. As you know, Lincoln wrote, every speech that he wrote was transcribed to really except one, and was called the law speech, and he actually got it roughly right anyway. So you knew what he thought. He was always writing letters. You knew how he felt. And you knew with Frederick Douglass, he wrote his biography 7 years after escaping for freedom. And he talked in detail about the brutality of slavery. And then he talked about what freedom brought and the need for education and what it meant to him. In a short time, even in the 1840s, the 1850s, Frederick Douglass became one of the most featured intellectuals and speakers, not in America, but in the world. There's still statues from him. And he talked about the inequity. He talked about how bad it was to have 4 million enslaved and 350,000 slave owners. And he talked about how we got to change that. And he combined with American abolitionists of all ages. And then we have this thing called a civil war, at which time we moved our country remarkably forward, but not fast enough. And we get through the 1960s. We've evolved tremendously. And the person that brings that up, of all people, is Bill Maher. To not cite the progress we made is to not cite American history, but to see what we've done while 7 continents all had slavery everywhere. Yep. We're the ones who got rid of it and fought a war to get rid of it. And that used to be what we were taught in school. And then we look around and see equal opportunities in almost every area of the country. And we are the most successful multicultural country in the world. And if there are problems, we fix them. But this is the first time that we are vilifying our own country. We're based on the wrong things. We're based on a lie. We're 1619. They're ripping away our foundation instead of talking about the progress.
Yeah, they're trying to erase history. But in your book, you talked about how Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass moved from being, to eventually to being friends.
It was amazing, Amy, in that I supported just with research because Frederick Douglass had the North Star, a newspaper he founded. He wrote for the Liberator, a newspaper he wrote for from his first mentor, William Lloyd Garrison. So you know exactly what he said. And he saw all this potential in Lincoln. He's like, I know you know slavery's bad. I know you see the problem with liberty in this country. You know that the Constitution is not being lived up to. Why, once you became president, are you moving so slow? And the reason was because our country wasn't there yet. He would have no country to preside over if he emancipated the slaves. Well, in theory, you would hope he would right away. But our country wasn't there yet. We had this background of, well, the slaves that is the engine of the South, and that's only 1% of African Americans lived in the North, so that wasn't anybody's problem. But as the war moved on, as it started going bad, and then it quickly reversed to the North, then he said, we're ready, and he released the Emancipation Proclamation. And then he said blacks can go fight for their freedom, and he put them in their own regiment, let them have guns, and then he fought for equal pay for the blacks and the whites in the North as he tried to win the South and bring our country back together. And he had a pace. Frederick Douglass would learn to appreciate the pace that Lincoln had to preside over because he wasn't an activist. He was president of an entire country, 7 states left. His goal was to bring it back. And when he was acquiescing and offered compromise, it drove Douglass nuts because he knew and lived slavery. He didn't want any gradual fixing of the problem. He wanted it yesterday. Amy, and just answered both your guys' questions, he would eventually understand that and put it in his speeches that as 10 years later, when he's dedicating a speech, he would say, now I understand more the pace that Lincoln was going at was probably necessary.
Well, it's great that you bring that up because Frederick Douglass was an unbelievably talented and intelligent guy, and he was a complicated guy because he had lived through the horror of slavery, and then then he had to learn sort of the political environment and what was possible versus what was right, and and how quickly you could get to what was morally correct. Because Lincoln, outlined the moral case against slavery and essentially the case to go to war in 1860 at Cooper Union. But there's also then the reality of how you navigate that to get to victory. And Douglass, he had some very complicated writings about white men and about America. But ultimately, the incredible thing, not only what you described, Douglass coming to realize that the pace was what was possible, but Douglass came to be opposed to conferring benefits or imposing responsibilities based on race because he understood that if they could put me on the wrong side, then I could be put on the wrong side again, or somebody else could, and I wouldn't want anybody put in the position that I was in as a slave, and I certainly wouldn't want to go back into that position. So we need to end this idea that the state should be conferring benefits or imposing responsibilities simply based on race.
It's unbelievable how right you are. I love the way you did. You want to move something. I like the way you put it. You got to do what's possible, and politics is reality. There might be people listening right now and say, I want this much in the defense budget. I want this much in social spending. I want to cut the budget here. Well, what's possible? What is your margin? Where's the country at? You're one opinion, and if you're leading that country, you have to think about everybody, and then what is possible to get done, because we don't have an absolute monarch. And what Frederick Douglass said was, I will work with anyone that will work with me, even if I don't agree with them on everything. So that's what he would do. And he would not only fight for African-American rights, he would fight for women's rights, the right to vote. He was combining with Susan B. Anthony and trying to get women what the African-Americans were able to get in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Citizenship, freedom, and then the right to vote, which seems unthinkable now. But that's where the world was at this point. So we used to study this stuff and put ourselves back in that time. We're judging everything as if we're the first generation ever. We're the first generation to know everything. We know the right way to do everything. Let's vilify those horrible people that preceded us. So I'm astounded by when I read the news as opposed to when I read history, and that's what I put together with the presidency.
I'll tell you, over at Fox News, you guys are going to have to open a history department with all the history books you and Brett Baer are putting out. I mean, when are you guys to start getting some honorary degrees or something? This is good stuff. Brian Kilmeade.
Brett did a great job. He picked up right where I left off, actually, because he picks up the next moment, which is Reconstruction after Lincoln, as Grant.
Yeah, with Grant.
Today, so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Brian Kilmeade, of course, the longtime co-anchor of Fox and Friends, nationally syndicated radio host, and New York Times bestselling author of the recently released, pick it up, The President and the Freedom Fighter, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and Their Battle to Save America's Soul. Brian, thanks again for joining us.
Go get him, Danny and Amy. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.